It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! It's Feedback Friday. And after this video goes live, I'm going to get, hopefully, if supplies last, my first COVID vaccine. Yay! First dose. Woo! One step closer to regaining abnormality. I don't have normalcy, so it's abnormalcy. If you like my abnormalcy, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Okay, there was a lot of really good feedback this week. A lot of it I just sort of read and people shared and, coolness. It was great. I love it when things settle down after a kerfuffle and some really, productive conversation happens. Sometimes that means people have to rage quit the channel so that chaff is kind of separated from the wheat. But then, the quality comments that ensue are actually productive. And no better example of this was the discussion surrounding the video on why I don't believe in the idea of too sensitive. There was a lot of great stuff. General buckets were people distinguishing between sensitivity and taking offense. And I do agree that there is a difference between someone legitimately having an issue with something. I will provide some examples of that in a bit. And somebody being offended by something. You guys know, I on and off do stand-up comedy. Obviously it's been off the last year. God, it doesn't seem like a year ago. But, there's a difference with somebody being offended and someone having a sensitivity they can't help, right? And one example somebody used in the, where was it? Clanker Crusher said, expanding on the autism example, thank God people didn't get offended by that. I thought it would be worth sharing some firsthand experience. I have sensory processing issues. Hearing someone chew, especially gum, feels like I'm being stabbed in the head. There's nothing physically wrong with my inner ear, but the pain is real and excruciating. It's like a real life crustaceous? I always get this wrong in Harry Potter. Avada Kedavra. When someone is chewing loudly, I will ask them to stop and explain why. If they keep doing it anyway, I'm going to get as far away from them as possible. I can keep a lid on myself and not completely freak out from the pain, but I'm definitely not going to stick around. Obviously, it's not reasonable to expect the gum chewing industry to evaporate overnight, nor for a 3-year-old to always chew quietly with their mouth closed. But if I'm interacting with someone regularly or for a non-trivial amount of time, I'm going to say something. Sometimes people aren't being cruel or inconsiderate, or they just forget. Other times there are access clashes, like a friend's sister who needs to chew gum to help manage her anxiety, and some people only pretend to care. Multiple people have pretended to swallow their gum, only to keep chewing 30 seconds later. I don't hang out with those people. This sensitivity limits what I can do, where I can go, and who I can socialize with. I hate it, but even though it's a significant inconvenience to others, I'm not going to endure someone that insists on ignoring multiple polite requests to stop torturing me. And the comment goes on, but I think that makes the point. That is a legitimate sensitivity, and I can relate to that because I get totally freaked out by ASMR videos. I cannot handle that amplified low-level sound. It's willies. And you can't help that. You can't help. I don't know if it's because I also have synesthesia. That is not fun. But ASMR totally causes me serious distress. And for some odd reason, when I did the touring stand-up shows, I'd get cornered by guys at these things saying I should do ASMR. And I'm like, no, I cannot stand that noise. And so, I'm not offended by ASMR. It does do very bad things to me. And I do think that offense, or what some people call weaponized sensitivity, is in a totally different category than people's legitimate sensitivities. I don't expect everyone to be as autism friendly as I am. But I make videos about video games. And it would be completely stupid to ignore, people on the autism spectrum in terms of those sensitivities. I mean, I used to get complaints when I wore like super bright lipstick. And at first I was like, come on. And then, instead of being an asshole about it, I asked some people and they said, yeah, super bright colors, especially on somebody's face, it can be really disconcerting. And that's something I try to keep in mind with color saturations. Sometimes, like with Serenity Sunflower's hair, it's part of the character. It's meant to be unnerving. But, music levels, that's not the music level that regular media is set at, but there were enough people affected by it that I accommodate because it makes sense. Because if you're going to do something regarding video games, a large portion of your audience is likely to be on the autism spectrum. So it's dumb to not accommodate that. Whereas people who get offended at stuff, fuck off. Like at this point, I don't want to do anything unintentionally painful, right? But if it's not pain, if somebody doesn't come with a really personal story, it's just, I make the rules and you broke one, which is what offense says to me. Fuck off. Like, okay, there is a different standard for offense on, say, a children's show. You're not going to be dropping F-bombs on a kid's show, right? Then a show for adults. Adults should be able to handle things that are difficult as long as it is not mean-spirited. I really think the intent behind things matters. Sometimes it's impossible to totally predict intent, but, I go back to this all the time, but it's not any less true now. When you're acting in the realm of art, when you're acting in the realm of comedy, you cannot predict what your audience, various members of your audience, bring into that experience. And you can learn from it, especially if you step on a third rail. But there's a big difference between going, all right, that's a sensitivity out there that I didn't realize existed, and oh my God, I must be a terrible person because I made this person feel bad, right? And if somebody's trying to make you feel like a terrible person over something, to me, that's a big sign that is the weaponized offense category and not a legitimate sensitivity. Because one thing I noticed in the comments was sort of an ongoing thing of people who self-identify as too sensitive to the point that it's debilitating and they hate it. One person used the screen name negligibly negative, which is very difficult to say, but it's a good vocal exercise. Thank you. They said, I'm definitely too sensitive. It's why I rarely engage in debate online. And if I do leave a comment, I find it hard to ever check back for replies because I know I can't handle too many negative responses. When sensitive becomes debilitating for me, I do think I'm too sensitive and I hate it. And I hesitated including this comment, but I'm hoping some positive reinforcement will help this person, because I'm going to suggest something here as somebody who was dismissed as being too sensitive, as somebody who dismissed myself as too sensitive, and then found out I had PTSD. That might be something you want to get checked. If sensitivities are debilitating, you deserve better than that. And it may not be PTSD, it may be something else, but you're worth it enough to not have to live that way. Like that doesn't sound like too sensitive. That sounds like there's an emotional injury going on there. And even if you don't have the money to go see a doctor, You may want to look up certain things, decide whether this sort of makes sense, that these are symptoms you recognize, the hypervigilance, the nightmares, the avoidance, stuff like that. It sounds like there's some avoidance going on there. Um, and see if certain exercises for PTSD, a PTSD app or something like that, may be able to help you with that. Now, it may not be PTSD. It may be something like borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder. Those will not get better without intervention. And so the sooner you find out, the better. Unfortunately, on the internet, I don't know where people are in the world, but I highly recommend looking up and connecting with your local independent living chapter to get some access to services going on, because you did take the step, and I get that it was scary for you to leave this comment negligibly negative. And that's a big step. Thank you for your trust. You deserve better than to live life constantly fearing rejection or fearing negativity, right? Risk sensitivity disorder is a thing. Rejection sensitivity disorder, I'm sorry, is a thing. It tends to be a symptom of something deeper going on. But, I know a lot of incredibly great people who struggle with that particular thing. And, there are ways to not just accept that as status quo. And, you seem like good people. So, I don't know if you want to contact me privately. If you don't feel comfortable with that, fine. Maybe do your own research and look. I get that taking these first steps are really hard when you're not in a risk immune state. That's something that's so debilitating about the mental health system, because the first outreach worker, the first social worker, the first doctor or counselor you get matched with may not be a good match for you. It may be a bad fit. I've been through it, and it's awful. It's awful. And so it's difficult to take those first few baby steps. And again, all I can offer is I think you're worth the effort. So, I don't know if you want to email me or somebody, but please let me know. I'm happy to help you possibly reach out to services when you're ready. No pressure. But man, that one just in the feels. And this is an example of somebody who, if somebody is too sensitive, they know it. And they're self-conscious about it. And as negligibly negative said, they hate it. Little me was like that. I was constantly defined by being too sensitive, and I wasn't too sensitive. I was taking on too much. You may notice I am hardly. I have the other problem now. I have to turn down the asshole slider, right? And put myself at the level of other people. There were quite a few comments where people were saying, I was super sensitive until I went through a bunch of shit. I can relate to that. There were a lot of discussions too about control, and controlling cancel culture and people canceling things that people enjoy. And one comment that really struck me, I've lost the person that said it. Maybe I've got it here, because I couldn't find the comment again, which is why I screen cap comments during the week. But is this it? No. There it is. White and Nerdy said, I'm starting to realize that I get snippy with you because the people I really want to yell at don't allow responses on their stuff. We can't even fight back. That comment is going to stay with me the next time things get kind of heated. I'm going to keep that in mind going forward because I hear you that that's not a situation that anybody can do anything about. And a few people said, well, that's not fair to you. And I said, you know what? If it helps a person feel like they're getting a semblance of control back by just being able to say something, I'm okay with that. And if that's a component of what's going on, I can pivot an approach if that's it. So I would appreciate hearing some unpacking, some additional, if anybody else feels similarly or anything we can build on that, because that does inform my responses. So I really appreciate comments like that. Tim Black said, in order for them to do what they really want, when they say they're mad at you, they're mad at what you are and they have to be deliberately vague. This isn't about any real anger at you. It's about undermining you as a reasonable voice for what they see as their causes. It's about control and nothing else. And I read this comment, Tim, because I have noticed that, and you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that there's this fear in the extremes that if a apparently reasonable or seemingly reasonable voice gets power, it'll be like a mask off thing. And so, it's this threat because somebody isn't cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And again, nothing I can do about that, except have a very thick skin and believe in what I'm doing and just keep going. And sometimes that gets really super tiring. But when there are sort of productive breakthroughs, it's all worth it. Another person, Naomi Armitage, went the other way with the too sensitive. I've been accused of being too sensitive all my life. I almost always win. How well do you know people games? I know that feel too, Naomi. I know exactly what you're saying. How much time do I have left? Oh, I got time. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple more comments, and then there was a really good question, and I want to make sure there's time for it. So Linus Gustafson said, I always say it is our experience that shape us, and it is why people will never see the same thing when they look at something. I think the solution to most of these things is to be better problem solvers. Too many solutions are based in the concept of get rid of it. A better solution is simply to offer diversity and let each person engage in what they like and absolutely avoid engaging in what they dislike. Few people get happier because some person walks by and says ban cars. But if you instead lifted the option of building more subways, like bike paths or other alternatives, you could severely lessen the amount of cars without imposing a ban. Or, like in comics, if you simply expanded and made both straight Captain America and gay Captain America and parallel universe stories, you could be selling both to whoever wants them. Linus, I agree with you. And I've gotten in mad trouble for suggesting that the problem with the legacy characters in Marvel, but also in DC, is that they replaced a beloved character to force people to accept the new character instead of existing alongside the beloved character. And I was very validated by Falcon and Winter Soldier because Disney finally seems to get that. Maybe they learned from the whole Star Wars debacle. But I very much agree with you that if people are really, truly, champions of diversity, and that sounds so cheesy. It sounds like a bad free-to-play online game, Champions of Diversity. But it's important to me. It's something that's very, very important to me. Not for there to be people who look or act like me in games, but just a greater diversity of character in general in games, I think will make better games. And when characters are allowed to be individuals, and when that matters, and when there's a plot designed to shape that individuality, or to unpack that individuality, I think that makes for a better product. And instead of fighting with stuff, I just prefer to really push games that I think do that well, like Ghost of Tsushima. I think there was an incredible amount of diversity in that game. There wasn't a single white person in it. And the female characters were excellent in that game. And yes, they weren't playable, but really, I really don't believe that the playable character is the most important character in terms of diversity sometimes in games. I think that if you've got a great character in a game and they're a scene stealer, that's what matters. That's what gives people who don't see themselves reflected in media much and may come from crappy home lives where they don't get the building blocks of a good sense of self and healthy boundaries. I think that can really help people. And selfishly, I just like interesting characters. And the best way to make interesting characters is to add other pieces that at least I haven't seen in stories before. So it's a win-win. I agree with you. Or on Dark Lord, I got a few of these I was prepared to totally disagree with you on the too sensitive thing, but by the end, he said, I have to go back to square one because I no longer believe some of the points I was planning to make. He makes an interesting distinction, though, and I think this is worth noting. Too sensitive is an impossible metric to objectively quantify. I'm going to jump over a bunch of stuff here to get to the meat here. I think what a lot of people, myself included, are actually trying to criticize when they use the shorthand too sensitive is, as a rule, people have a responsibility to be aware of society's overall general Overton window, not necessarily to agree with that Overton window, but to be aware of it, aware of where it does and does not match with their own sensitivities, and willing to grant others a benefit of the doubt as long as they're behaving within society's Overton window, even if not that individual's personal Overton window. If someone does something that offends you, for those of you who don't know, the Overton window is basically short, reductive version, the window of what society considers sort of acceptable, mainstream at any given time. If someone does something that offends you, something you have a sensitivity to, and that thing they did is well outside our general cultural Overton window, it's reasonable to rebuke them, maybe even to want them to be punished in some way, because they can reasonably be expected to have known better, to have already been aware that their actions were considered unacceptable. And if that person also disagrees with society's Overton window, just in a different way, and is trying to move the window or to assert their right to defy it, fine, okay, they're offending consciously. History may even vindicate them one day, but when you do that, you assume a certain amount of risk of social consequences, sometimes even professional consequences, depending on the circumstances in which you're doing it. However, if someone does something you have a personal sensitivity to, but what is within the general Overton window of society, or if we're talking about their past actions, was within it at the time they did it, you can't just go off on them. You have to accept that to most people, their behavior would seem reasonable. And even if you think your sensitivity is very logical and correct, another person cannot be expected to know better than to do what they're doing. You can explain your sensitivity and politely request reasonable accommodation for them. And I think society's general Overton window expects us all to do that for each other in the name of common courtesy, although Twitter seems determined to erode that expectation. But you cannot attack them for not having already known about that sensitivity, not agreeing with it, or refusing to change their overall behavior beyond giving you reasonable accommodation. And I think that's a really fair compromise. As somebody who has to be very aware, there's a gaming Overton window, and then there's the normie Overton window, and I kind of have to be aware of both. That's true of a great many subcultures. This is what we call code switching, right? It's funny to me that when people say I'm edgier on Twitter, I'm like, have you seen my Twitch stream? Like, I just get edgy because I'm playing video games and stuff comes out of my mouth. I say very politically incorrect things, and I often follow it with that was politically incorrect. I could totally get why somebody would not want to be exposed to that, to that edginess. It's not to everyone's taste. But when people are like, you're edgier on Twitter, I'm like, have you seen my Twitch? And that's sort of when I'm like, it's Twitter, man. We're limited to, we're forced to be brief, so I can't do all the caveats and setups before I make my main point. That's all it is. And that's a similar thing, that there are certain, not only is there a general social Overton window, but that there are also sort of, when you get into various things, right? Like before COVID, I'd go to these very posh, like Royal Military History nights, when I'd go to my Kentucky Colonels encampments, and everybody would dress up, and there are expected rules of decorum there, right? Like I wouldn't show up dressed like this. You dress nice. Men have to wear a jacket, right? That's the rules there. And I think there is something to be said. And as somebody who considers themselves progressive in their politics, this is something I have to be acutely aware of. In the days before it was more accepted, the idea that someone was not, born their assigned gender, they were just assigned their gender at birth. They didn't become gender, right? And people would go, what? And I'd have to be really patient. I couldn't just ream them out because I was aware I sounded crazy to the people I was talking to 10-odd years ago. And then I got turned around and got called transphobic by people on the internet who didn't know me. That's fine. Fuck them. Right? But yeah, you do have to be patient, recognizing that there is sort of a where culture's at, where the zeitgeist is at. I love the word zeitgeist. You're right, Oron. You're right. And see, this is, instead of button heads, he's like, all right, point. Here's a counterpoint. And this is how we build viable solutions. Now, here's a question, and I hope I left myself enough time for this, because this is a really good question. Adam Meyer says, genuine query here. I would like to test the boundaries of this idea. Does this apply to terrible people as well? Is it possible to suggest that homophobes, anti-Semites, and bigots are likewise not oversensitive, but that we have no intention of giving accommodation to their hateful nonsense? This could have deeper meaning if that is the case. Less boundary testing, but still useful. At this point, our society takes the sensitivity to nudity very seriously, when I think that this is misguided. I agree with you, Adam. In this case, the sensitivity is already being accommodated, though perhaps unreasonably, in my opinion. This is unreasonable. As we redraw the map, are previous accommodations up for debate? And how do we decide what is reasonable accommodation? I look forward to hearing. Okay, so thank you for the I look forward. That was very formal. I like that. I didn't see that first time. What we know is that what truly brings somebody back from serious bigotry territory is kindness. Now, going to that Overton window thing Oron Dark Lord talked about, people who are openly racist understand they're doing it. And this is part of the thing. Like, I don't care about the elites. Like, they're not better than me. They know they're outside of the Overton window, right? And that is telling. So, but I have found that a lot of people who pull that shitlord routine are actually controlling rejection. They're usually trying to seek approval from an abusive family member who, they need to echo it or else. But they are also saying all these offensive, horrible things so that they know they're going to get rejected. And so it doesn't hurt when they're rejected. So in a way, they are extremely sensitive people. Now, you're not... Stephen Miller and Company just filed a lawsuit trying to claim that aid to historically socially disadvantaged farmers is racist. And I'm, sure that is going to just get dismissed as too sensitive by a great many people on the left. But you can't really do that because people like Stephen Miller figured out that's where their power base lies. You do have to look at it and treat it for the purposes of argument, like it has any merit at all, and go, well, no, you're not, you're not discriminating against a group because you are recognizing that another group was disadvantaged in the past. So again, you don't use the too sensitive in the argument. You refute them on points. And I very much agree with you on the nudity thing. I'd say a boob never hurt anybody, but I have given myself black eyes. Kidding. Running upstairs with no bra. Kidding. But it does hurt. But I do think culture is not sensitive enough when it comes to gore on TV. Oh my God, the medical procedurals have been nuts right now. But I do think society is way too sensitive when it comes to nudity. However, Overton window, right? That's my personal opinion. I'm not going to just say people are too sensitive about nudity. I'm going to point out that, first of all, any urge you repress becomes stronger. And so if you want, basically, let's face it, it's what we want our little darling angels to be safely married off before they get preggers, which is why the focus is on girls and not boys. But, if one gender's sexuality is treated as a normal thing and sexual desires are treated as a normal thing and nobody's else is, that's an issue. That's not allowing everyone to be whole people in media. And I personally don't, I know people like, but children. So a kid can't look at an anatomy textbook to see what the stages of puberty are or something like that. Why? Well, then you get into control, right? So there's an example of, like I said, personally, I can think people are just too sensitive about nudity all they want. But I have to make my case because my view doesn't rule the day. So, I can, the cop-out is, people are just too sensitive. And they go, no, you're just a dumb slut. And because they're in charge, they win. Right? That's the whole purpose of the theories. So, I think a lot of people don't see people who express overt bigotry as being too sensitive or being extremely sensitive people. But when you drill down, it is really that. And I don't expect anybody to take the time with people like that because, again, Overton window, people have the right to go, get that away from me. That bothers me too much. I don't have the spoons. But people who really want to pull people away from those sorts of things, the only way to do it is kindness. So, Adam, there's your test. And I didn't think about it that way, but it worked really well. So, well done, man. I appreciate challenges like that. If you like this sort of content, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. And no, I don't support racism. I want to end it. And that means understanding it. Thanks for watching.